There is a question almost no one asks out loud, because asking it feels like admitting something embarrassing. Why does one specific person live in your mind with so much force when there are people who love you, support you, and show up for you every single day, and you barely think about them at all? Why does your attention keep returning to the one person who gives you the least certainty? If you have ever lain awake replaying a 5-second glance, a half-finished sentence, a message that took too long to arrive, you already know this feeling has nothing to do with logic. It is not weakness. It is not bad luck. It is something your mind is doing on purpose, for reasons buried far below the part of you that talks, decides, and explains itself to other people. By the end of this, you will understand exactly what that mechanism is, what it reveals about you, and why the person who occupies your mind the most is rarely the person who is actually right for you. Stay with this, because the explanation gets uncomfortable before it gets useful. Before we go further, if this kind of psychological breakdown is something you want more of, take 2 seconds to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps this content reach more people who need to hear it, and it costs you nothing. Now, let's get into it. Her name was Mira, although the details have been changed because the pattern matters far more than the person. Mira was 29, sharp, independent, the kind of woman who had her own apartment, her own friends, her own sense of direction in life. She was not lonely. She was not desperate. She was, by every outside measure, completely fine. Then she met Daniel at a friend's birthday dinner, and something shifted that she could not name. Daniel was not the most attractive man in the room. He was not the funniest. He did not perform, did not try to impress anyone, did not chase the conversation. He simply sat there, occasionally asking a question that nobody else thought to ask, the kind of question that made you feel like he had actually been listening instead of waiting for his turn to talk. At one point, he looked directly at Mira and said, "You seem like someone who spends a lot of time taking care of everyone except yourself." He said it once. He did not repeat it. He did not turn it into a conversation. He moved on to someone else at the table within seconds. Mira went home that night and could not stop thinking about that sentence. Not because it was clever, because it was accurate. Nobody in her life had said that to her before, not her mother, not her closest friend, not the 2 men she had dated seriously in the last 5 years. Daniel had looked at her for less than 10 minutes and identified something true that everyone else had missed for years. This is the first mechanism, and it has a name in psychology: accurate empathic attunement. Human beings spend most of their lives being seen incompletely. People see your job title, your appearance, your role in the group, the version of you that is convenient to interact with. Almost nobody sees the actual internal experience underneath it, the quiet exhaustion, the specific fear, the thing you do that nobody notices you are doing. When a person manages to see that hidden layer, even briefly, even by accident, the brain registers it as significant, not romantic, significant. Attraction researcher Arthur Aaron, who designed the well-known 36-question study on closeness, found that the single fastest route to emotional intimacy between 2 strangers was not compliments, was not charm. It was being known accurately. Mira did not fall for Daniel's looks. She fell for the experience of being correctly read after years of being misread. 3 weeks later, they were texting daily. Nothing physical had happened. No labels had been placed on it. But Mira noticed something strange about her own behavior. She checked her phone constantly. She reread his messages, searching for hidden meaning. She replayed conversations looking for clues about what he actually felt. Her best friend pointed out that Mira had never done this with any of her previous boyfriends, men she had actually been in committed relationships with. Why was she more consumed by a man who had made no promises than by men who had made many? This is where most explanations stop, because most people assume the answer is simply that Daniel was special. He was not special in the way she believed. He was ambiguous, and ambiguity is one of the most powerful psychological triggers that exists. In the 1950s, psychologist B. F. Skinner ran experiments on reinforcement schedules using animals pressing levers for rewards. He discovered something that should disturb anyone who has ever been obsessed with a person who gives mixed signals. Animals that received a reward every single time they pressed the lever eventually pressed it less. Predictability reduced motivation. But animals that received a reward only sometimes, on no fixed schedule, pressed the lever obsessively, far more than the group that always got rewarded. This is called a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, and it is the exact mechanism that powers slot machines. It is also, almost identically, the exact mechanism that powers obsessive attraction to emotionally inconsistent people. Daniel was not deliberately manipulating Mira. He was simply a person with his own unresolved fear of closeness, which meant his warmth came and went without any pattern Mira could predict. One day he would text good morning unprompted. The next day he would go quiet for 40 hours. Mira's brain, without her permission, began treating Daniel exactly like a slot machine. Every text she sent became a lever pull. Every warm reply became a reward. Unpredictable, intermittent, and therefore far more addictive than steady affection could ever be. This is the part almost nobody tells you. The intensity of longing you feel for someone is not proportional to how right they are for you. It is frequently proportional to how unpredictable they are. Calm, secure, consistent people rarely produce obsession. They produce something quieter, something that feels like safety instead of fire. And here is the uncomfortable truth most people are never told. Human brains are wired by evolution to mistake intensity for importance. If something fires the nervous system this strongly, ancient parts of the brain assume it must matter for survival. It does not occur to the nervous system that a slot machine and a soulmate can feel identical from the inside. Mira began noticing physical symptoms, a tightness in her chest before opening his messages, difficulty concentrating at work on days he went quiet, a small, sharp surge of relief when his name appeared on her screen. A relief so strong it almost felt like joy, except it left her depleted instead of nourished afterward. This pattern has a clinical name, first described in detail by psychiatrist Frank Tallis: limerence. Limerence is not love. Limerence is an involuntary, intrusive, almost obsessive state of infatuation, characterized by constant intrusive thinking about one person, extreme sensitivity to any sign of their approval or rejection, and an inability to feel calm until the uncertainty resolves. Limerence behaves more like a craving than a connection. It produces the same dopamine activity patterns seen in early-stage substance dependence, according to neuroimaging research from Helen Fisher's work at Rutgers University on the neurobiology of romantic attraction. Here is the part that explains why Mira specifically, and not someone else, became fixated on Daniel specifically. It was not random. Mira had grown up with a father who was warm in unpredictable bursts, attentive on good days, emotionally absent on bad ones, and a mother who praised her only when she achieved something impressive, never simply for existing. Mira had spent her entire childhood learning, without ever consciously deciding to learn it, that love had to be earned through performance, and that affection arriving on a schedule you could not control was simply what love felt like. This produced what attachment researchers John Bowlby and later Mary Ainsworth identified as an anxious attachment pattern, a relational template in which a person's nervous system actually calms down around inconsistency, because inconsistency feels familiar, while it grows suspicious of steady, predictable affection, because steady affection feels foreign and therefore untrustworthy. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Mira was not falling for Daniel. She was falling for the familiar shape of her childhood, replayed in adult form, with a new face attached to an old emotional architecture. Daniel was simply the latest person to fit a lock that had been built decades earlier. This does not mean Daniel did not matter, or that what Mira felt was fake. It means the intensity of the feeling was coming from somewhere much older than the relationship itself. Psychologists call this process transference, a concept that originated with Sigmund Freud and was later expanded significantly by object relations theorists like Donald Winnicott. Transference happens when a person unconsciously assigns the emotional role of an earlier important figure, usually a parent, onto a new person in the present. The new person becomes a screen onto which old, unresolved feelings get projected. This is why people often say, with real confusion in their voice, "I don't know why I'm so attached to him, we've barely even spoken." The attachment was never really about how much time had passed. It was about how perfectly the new person matched an old emotional blueprint that had been waiting, quietly, for someone to activate it. Watch what happened next in Mira's story, because it follows the exact pattern that researchers have documented again and again. Daniel pulled away for 9 days with no explanation. Mira's obsession did not decrease during that silence. It intensified. She found herself constructing elaborate theories about what he might be thinking, defending his silence to her friends, the same friends who watched her shrink in real time. This is what behavioral scientists call the Zeigarnik effect, named after psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who discovered that the human mind remembers unfinished tasks far more vividly than completed ones. An open question occupies far more mental real estate than a closed one. A relationship that is unresolved, ambiguous, hanging in mid-air, will be remembered, replayed, and obsessed over far more intensely than a relationship that has reached a clear and stable conclusion, whether that conclusion is together or finished. The brain cannot stop returning to an open file. Daniel eventually reappeared, warm again, apologetic, affectionate, offering no real explanation for the silence. And Mira felt something she was deeply ashamed to admit to herself. Relief so overwhelming it felt like falling in love all over again. This is not love returning. This is a stress response resolving. Her cortisol had been elevated for 9 days. The moment the threat lifted, her nervous system flooded her with relief chemicals that her brain misinterpreted as romantic feeling, because relief and infatuation activate strikingly similar neural pathways. She was not more in love with Daniel after the silence. Her nervous system was simply recovering from a threat that Daniel himself had created. Here is where this story, and stories like it, almost always go in one of two directions. Mira eventually noticed the pattern herself. She brought it to a therapist who helped her see what we have just walked through. The attunement that hooked her, the unpredictability that addicted her, the childhood blueprint that selected Daniel specifically out of every person in that room, and the relief cycle that she had mistaken for deepening love. She did not stop caring about Daniel immediately. Awareness does not work like a switch, but she stopped mistaking the intensity of her craving for evidence that he was right for her. She began asking a different question, one almost nobody asks while they are inside the obsession. Does this person make my nervous system calm? Or does this person make my nervous system work overtime to earn calm? That single question changed everything for her, because it shifted attention away from how much she wanted Daniel and toward what wanting him this badly was actually revealing about an old wound that had nothing to do with him at all. The deeper psychological truth underneath this entire story is this: the person who occupies your mind the most is not always the person who deserves to be there. Obsession is not a reliable measurement of compatibility, of love, or of destiny. It is frequently a measurement of unresolved history meeting present uncertainty, and your nervous system mistaking the resulting chaos for chemistry. This does not mean every intense connection is unhealthy. Some of the most meaningful relationships in a person's life begin with real intensity. But intensity built on consistency feels like warmth. Intensity built on unpredictability feels like hunger. Learning to tell the two apart while you are inside the feeling rather than after it has already cost you years is one of the most valuable psychological skills a person can develop. So before you decide that the person who consumes your thoughts is the one your life has been building toward, ask yourself honestly which version of intensity you are actually experiencing. Ask whether your peace grows around this person, or whether your peace only returns once the uncertainty they created finally lifts. The answer to that question will tell you more about your future than any feeling, however overwhelming, ever could.